I now call to order this work session, Anchorage Assembly. Today is July 2nd, 2024. We'll be having a discussion on executive appointment. Mark Corsentino, Director of Anchorage Hydropower Utility. We'll do introduction, starting with Mr. Salt.
Randy Salt.
Mark Littlefield.
Cameron Pereira.
Karen Bronga.
Anna Brawley.
Meg Zalatel.
Christopher Constant.
Felix Rivera.
On the phone, we have Mr. Johnson.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez.
Fred.
All right, thank you. And from the administration, welcome to your first work session in your new capacity. Mayor LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you all for having us here today. I'm grateful to be here and excited to get to work. And I want to start by saying that my hope is there will be a positive and productive relationship between the administration and the Assembly in service of the people of Anchorage. My commitment is to be present, to take part in conversations, and to look for the common ground to move Anchorage forward. I look forward to the work ahead. And today I'm happy to be here to introduce or maybe reintroduce Mark Corsentino. Mark has been an incredible resource to the municipality in his role at AWU, and I'm glad to be here to recommend his appointment as Director of the Anchorage Hydropower Utility. Mark is known across the municipality as a subject matter expert and someone we can rely on, and who his team has relied on for both steady and innovative leadership. We are confident Mark's skills and backgrounds meet the requirements to hold this position, and I enthusiastically put him forward for this important role. As you all know, the hydropower director position has been unfilled for years and is important to ensuring the municipality has a seat at the table when it comes to the fish and wildlife process and the future of Eklutna. It is also a position with a lot of potential for innovation beyond that. There is more work ahead, but I'm looking forward to working with all of you and alongside the native village of Eklutna and our partners. Today is just the first step that makes sure the MOA has a voice and a vote. There is more to come, but I want to thank Mark for being willing to step in and serve. And Mr. Chair, I'll just turn to Mr. Colhaste, just if you have anything to add.
Thank you, Mr. Colhaste.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would just offer that I've worked alongside Mark for a number of years and very closely with him since January of 2023, I guess it was. I lose track. And Mark is he's exceptional at the job he's been doing. He's responsive. If I ask a question, I get an answer. I can always rely on his answers. And I would so I fully echo Mayor LaFrance's comments and recommendation for Mark. And I would close by saying that you look at the initials after his name, and there's little else to be said. Professional engineer. So I joke. We typically, if it's okay with you, Mr. Chair, we typically give the applicant an opportunity to offer a few words as well.
Mr. Corsentino, we'd love to hear from you.
Well, thank you everyone for the opportunity and for the confidence in this role. I didn't have a lot of prepared statements other than to say that I look forward to the opportunities and to the working partners and relationships and the opportunities that present itself here. I'm not here to make waves, but at the end of the day, I think Mayor LaFrance said it right. I think the municipality wants to have a formal voice in this process. I understand and respect that. And at the end of the day, as Ken alluded to, I'm a licensed civil engineer in the state of Alaska. And to me, there's fundamental canons and oaths that I uphold to, which is integrity, objectivity, fairness, and impartiality, all for the benefit of the public. We hold paramount the public welfare and public interest at heart, and that's important as we go through this process. And that's all I can do is commit to upholding that. So other than that, the only other thing I think it's important to note in this setting is, to the best of my knowledge, I'm still AUGM as well, because I had questions already from staff as they saw the agenda, and I said, no, I'm still retaining the AUGM ownership role because there's a lot going on with the utility. At the end of the day, Eklutna Lake is a water resource. It's used for an abundance of needs, from pristine water for drinking water to hydropower has been a useful thing over the years as well, and I still think that can be retained, but with the caveats and recognition of the problem that all energy sources create. But at the end of the day, the benefits they create, we have to be fair and partial and find common ground to come up with innovative solutions to reconcile and appease all the different interests. So with that, that's all I've got. Thank you.
Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Can someone, staff, please share, or if someone knows, put on the record what the requirements are for this position? Because I remember that there were some specific requirements, but I can't recall them at the moment.
So we'll have legal prop up the specific requirements in a moment. If anybody over here wants to just briefly talk about what the requirements probably that the RCA have for the position relative to qualification.
Experience in utility prudent management practices, which is one of the things I hold, and then familiarity and experience with generation and transmission of power in the rail belt, which we also have.
Right. I think that when Mr. Hurt pulls it up, that's going to be exactly the quote is prudent management plus rail belt energy experience. Prudent utility management. Anything else?
Sure. If no one else is in the queue, then I guess my follow-up question is, does the administration perceive any issues with having someone really fit both of those roles of AWU general manager and this position?
Through the chair, I can answer that. I think a couple of things, going back in history briefly. With the prior administration, I did sit on this role unofficially for about 1.5 to 2 years, simply because Eklutna Lake is an MOA asset that has a lot of interest, both water for drinking and then also hydropower. It's always been there. At the end of the day, there are several entities in the United States that have utilities that are jointly owned. In other words, there may be Seattle Public Utilities comes to mind. They generate power, they generate water, and a few other utilities. So having them under one umbrella is not uncommon. In this respect, I think the reason I stepped down from the role with the last administration simply was because we were in a phase of negotiations with the water, and we really need to clear up the conflict of interest to make it fair and unbiased. Generally speaking, that has come and gone. So it doesn't mean that there couldn't be conflicts moving forward, but that's what the media manager's for, to adjudicate. Because even back in the day when we were MLMP, we also had A1 MLMP, which would have had conflicting interests. So you have to have a mediator, because ultimately the MOA owns these utilities and assets. And so ultimately the person that oversees these roles, the department heads from MLP, Anchorage Hydro, or AWU, is the municipal manager and ultimately the mayor. So.
Ms. Salazar.
Thank you. So I guess the director of the Anchorage Hydropower Utility to date the Anchorage Hydropower Utility to date hasn't had much to do. And so I guess, what do you see your role being as the person who would be in charge of this utility? And how do you see that role potentially intersecting with your work at AWU? I think they're related. I don't necessarily think that they conflict, but right, it sounds like a really big job, frankly, and you already have a really big job. So as someone who can speak from experience of having 2 really big jobs, how do you see the 2 working together?
Well, I'll answer this by saying they certainly can. It's a heavy lift, and there's no doubt. But at the end of the day, we're still trying to formulate with the administrations. This is day number 2, I believe. I think there's policy discussions that have to occur and evolve over time, in short order too. But at the end of the day, I'm going to leave that for an evolving process to be formulated more as we in the next few days, if not weeks. I think there's work to be done there.
Day 2. What took you so long? Next on the queue, I have Ms. Brawley and then Mr. Presverdia, Ms. Branca. Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thanks. My question about potential conflicts was already answered. My other question is, I think going back to the qualifications, I understand that it's I think an RCA determination for who'd be qualified for that position. So have you guys already gone through that process, and or what does that look like, beyond this confirmation? Thanks.
The short answer is we have not gone through the process yet. You have to go back to the ruling when it was the position or the voting right was taken away, and look to give. There's guidance in there that describes the next steps. I don't remember the exact words, but essentially submit a name that you believe is qualified, that meets those criteria I discussed, And then I don't know, I don't know the exact time frame or process of what to expect, but it's a step-by-step process is all I can say.
So essentially, the municipality takes action, submits a person, and then there's a world in which they come back and say that you would not be qualified, but it sounds like we're reasonably confident that you would be. Thanks.
Next, Mr. Presvidia.
Thanks. Just a couple of questions. Not that we have to consult them, but in the decision to appoint, have you consulted with the native village of Eklutna? Are they aware of this appointment? And has there been a conversation about that prior to this decision?
I can speak to that
Yeah, go ahead.
if there's no objection. I spoke with the president of the tribe yesterday and detailed this with them, and there were no objections.
Okay. And then I guess my other question, and this is maybe just a little, I think that knowing what we've experienced in the city over the last 3 years with this administration, I think that anyone who is carried over from this past administration to this next administration is going to be in question for me. I think that is, and that is not any particular person. I think anyone that was involved in what we saw for the last 3 years. And so I guess I just want to put that on the record that it's really important to me that people are here to do the job for the right reason, and so as we're making these transitions, I'm going to just have a natural skepticism for those that were here for the last few years, and now we want to keep. And so I don't expect an answer to that, but I expect us to run this city very differently over the next few years, and I would hope that the people that are chosen to continue on feel the same way. So,
Well, I do want to answer that question because there wasn't there, but I think that's important that air is cleared. From a leadership perspective, you have to have vision and clarity. And one of the things I've told even the past administration is, look, I work for the ratepayers. I serve at the pleasure of the mayor, and I report to the municipal manager, but I remember who I work for. And if there's odds, we'll have to reconcile those. But at the end of the day, I work for the constituents and the residents of Anchorage first, and the ratepayers.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Collier.
If I may, just to follow up on that, as I mentioned, I've worked very closely with Mr. Corsentino for a year and a half in his role as the manager, the GM of AWU, and much of the discussions I've had with him have been revolving around Eklutna. And I would just affirm that he has never acted in anything other than what I would consider the public interest, the interest of the ratepayers, and compliance with the law. So just to emphasize that, thank you.
And I would only make one correction. You said this administration, and I would say that administration. So slight change, but I'm an English major. So next in the queue, we have Ms. Bronga.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just curious, do you envision that your role would expand beyond the hydro we have at this point and be looking toward possibly expanding hydropower in Anchorage? And then I also was thinking of, I know at least there's one private hydropower operator in Ram Valley, and any possibility this could lend support to their operations. It was pretty difficult to get them online. They went through a lot of hoops to get their project going.
Yeah. At the end of the day, that first question is really one for the administration to decide upon, and that's in the assembly. I mean, all the legislative and administrative bodies for the MOA's owners have to decide that question. As far as the other aspect, that's a PURPA rule, and they provide power to the MEA, and there's hoops to jump through in any regulatory environment with respect to putting power back on the grid from those types of things. But that's what the rule that allows that. But every utility will have its own say in that. At the end of the day, that's you see that all over with solar, wind, all these other sources that people want to generate, whether it's on their rooftops and solar. The laws allow that kind of stuff. You just have to follow the utilities design standards to put that back on the grid. I don't think the MOA is going to own stuff like that, but I can tell you, for instance, AWU does own turbines, hydropower turbines, smaller scale, on the order of about 1 megawatt that we also provide power to the grid and our own facilities on. So there's all kinds of things. Now, whether MOA wants to own all those in collectivity, I don't personally see that as an option, but I think at larger scale, it might make sense to get grant opportunities for some bigger scale projects that may make sense collectively. But that's a discussion that has to be had again with the legislative and administrative bodies.
Next, we have Mr. Salt.
Thank you. I have a small shopping list here. It'd be good to know. Sorry, I'm not as familiar with the position. Who it reports to, if you plan on having direct reports, if you plan on having budgetary needs, your willingness to get involved in as a utility now as other hydro projects throughout the state, and your thoughts on work with Chugach, NSTAR, and producers around now that you're a utility again, cooking like gas in that component.
So at a high level, early on, all that stuff can evolve over time. But at this point, there are no employees. Really, what Anchorage Hydropower is set up to do is really it's a continuation of the MLMP sale, because quite frankly, Chugach couldn't afford all of MLMP. So right now, that's set up to collect revenue, put money in trust for future projects such as the Anchorage Hydropower project. So really, it's a book group to make sure that the accounting is being done, that commitments are being upheld and maintained. But it also, because it left a residual majority ownership, there is potential for growth if that is what the MOA wants. As far as the rest of the stuff, we're just in the generation business right now at best. The other stuff you're talking about, transmission and reliability type stuff, unless the MOA, Anchorage Hydropower right now is not really in the transmission world, it's in generation. If it wants to expand that for whatever reason for various business needs, that could occur, but then that changes the dynamics of the utility again.
Thank you.
So next, Mr. Hurt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In response to Member Rivera's question, it took me a minute to find the actual language from the RCA order, but the RCA basically found that it was essential that the representative have knowledge of prudent utility practice and the rail belt electrical generation and transmission system, which I believe is largely as Mr. Corsentino described it. And then later in their opinion, the language that they used was essentially that we had to demonstrate to their satisfaction that we had that expertise, presumably that aforementioned expertise in the opinion.
So I have myself in the queue, and I have a small checklist as well. So I think maybe some of the things I'll say are more assertions than questions. I recognize we are the assembly. We are not the ones whose job now it is to set these things up and make them official. It's for us to receive proposals and authorize and fund them if we believe they're of merit. However, in this case, the assembly has been working so hard on the Eklutna question that this is a shared mutual interest of very important timeliness at this time. And that's why I've been having close conversations with as many people I can in the administration, our attorneys. All of this conversation before us now is a product of the work that we've been doing toward the establishment of a better process for the 1991 agreement and a better outcome for the people of the native village of Eklutna, the people of Anchorage, the fish, the river, all of it. And so with that in mind, I think there are some questions that were asked by, I think, was Ms. Braga asking about like future potential ideas. And one idea that I think Mr. Corsentino hinted at, didn't state, was that there are other utilities that have a broader aspect than just one function. And for me, and this is just putting it out there in the record to begin the public conversation about it, the idea is great to streamline the utility leadership in such a way that a certain set of utilities has a singular leadership and we expand the concept of what our utilities can do. And to me, what's most interesting is the conversation about using this utility and its revenues all within the bounds of the law and the RCA and all the requirements that have to come with it to expand our efforts in climate action, to transform our buildings so they have renewable power and where we can to save us money in the long run and burn less carbon, to keep the lights on, even lights getting switched out, whether it be in our utilities and enterprises and our other buildings. Use it as a tool to leverage investments, to reduce costs, to be more savvy in being future oriented. So some of this idea is use it in that manner and maybe expand into other energy opportunities. And one of the most important things that I have a lot of things to talk about here. Probably the most important one, I'll boil it down so I can hand the gavel back, is the idea of participating in the statewide and regional conversations about future energy security. Because at this time, we don't have anybody sitting in the room when there are massive negotiations and cook inlet power conversations going on, where Anchorage is just going to get drug along and we're going to have to take what we're handed if we don't have someone in the room. Mark, do you think that there's an opportunity, or what kind of opportunity do you think the Muni has to participate in some of these very important conversations for the long-term future of the municipality?
Well, I think you alluded to it. There are opportunities because ultimately the largest percentage of the population that receives that energy is going to be in the Anchorage South Central area. So I think it's important that the largest city participates in that. I mean, and to that end, one of the concepts that has been floated is a very firm power, or a very good renewable power source, not carbon free. And it's a need driven already by Anchorage's needs upcoming, is the concept of waste to energy, simply because that's a firm 20 to 30 megawatts of power that can help offset natural gas and other sources. And it's firm and it's there. And there's a high need, especially in the, one of the things I'm very familiar with is the environmental regulatory environment in the world we live in right now. And there's some challenges ahead of us, and we've got to find solutions to that. So there's a lot of opportunities there that will help offset some of those future power needs. And I think it's important that MOA is part of that discussion. And one other point to that goes back to some of Member Salt's question. While there is no employees other than the department head, I think it's important to know that MOA does have contracts with electrical engineers and experts in this industry, simply because you may need to pull from that outside of the partners we have in MBA or Chugach and MEA.
So for my part, I love the idea of this administration taking a foot forward lead into power, into our future, and using this as at least the beginning. I mean, this one person can't do it all. But if we have somebody who's focused on these questions, then we're in a good position. And lastly, I'll say the RCA conversation is ongoing between the assembly leadership, between the mayor and the administration on how best to proceed, and with all due haste. And so it's not one that's ready for prime time, but it's definitely happening. So, Mr. Presberdia.
Thanks. I appreciate what you said, Chris. And I'm the challenge I'm having is that I'm hearing these things from you, and I just don't know where you stand on these issues that Chris is talking about, and that today is about trying to understand you and your confirmation. So I'd love to hear you speak about your position related to climate action. You know, your sort of ideas in terms of whether that's something you see it as a priority or not. And I'd also really love to hear you speak specifically about your position on the full restoration of the Eklutna River, and if that's something that you believe that should happen, and we should see 5 species back and fully to do that. So I'd like to hear your sort of position and thoughts on those issues, so we get a sense of where you stand. Thanks.
Yeah, this first point was, climate action. And I think energy and climate action kind of go hand in hand. They're at the end of the day, there's a lot more opportunities to have carbon-free energy sources. Now, there's pros and cons to all energy sources, I'll have to admit, whether it's solar and wind, they're not necessarily dispatchable readily, and they've got their own environmental challenges, whether it be birds and sands and ocean ecosystems. But at the end of the day, they don't have a fuel source, and that's good for the, what I'd call the environment. But you have to pair that with some sort of redundancy or reliability backup. And so there's opportunities, especially with the Eklutna Hydro, to pair, solar, wind with pumped hydro type concepts. There's some really good opportunities there. And I think there's opportunities to make that work for, depending on what full river restoration means. To get all 5 species of salmon, you bet. I think there's some really good opportunities that others have presented that you have to take a holistic look. Look, I'm an engineer by trade. My whole belief is to come up with innovative ideas and solutions that people may not like initially, but you've got to understand what are the real problems that people are bringing up. You have problems you've identified. You've come with preconceived notions of solutions, but sometimes you got to go back to the real problem. If the problem is you want 5 species of salmon, there are absolutely different ways to do that potentially. And then the question is when, right? I think, what I've heard for some of the meetings, Meg invited me to one of the meetings with NVE and Trout Unlimited to propose their siphon solution. And what I heard in that meeting was, look, we don't expect, because this is right after the dark, gloomy spell where we had the natural gas shortage about. I think the litmus was, we can't get our hydro right now because we actually used it heavily at that time frame. But we understand that we want to have a replacement idea and concepts down the road. And I think there's ways to do that paired with other energy sources. And I think we just got to be thoughtful and creative on that and not be closed-minded just because it's always been this way or always done this way. I mean, the one thing that really make a lot of sense on quite frankly, solar, wind, and even hydro, is you're not paying for fuel. That is a huge benefit. You've got to find ways to have it dispatchable though, so it's reliable and there when you need it. But there are solutions at hand, and we just need to be thoughtful, creative, and can't be closed-minded. So there's some great opportunities, especially now when you look at the funding sources available for some of those things. If you have grant opportunities to build that stuff, you should jump on that, because the largest cost, at least in most infrastructure and utilities, are the largest cost of rates in most utilities. Well, power, I could argue, is going to be fuel is a big chunk of it. But the other one for utilities like water, it's the infrastructure. So if you can get that infrastructure paid for, your rates are not going to be hit as much, if at all. And that's a huge golden opportunity you do not want to miss on.
Right. We're just about out of time. We have one more in the queue, and I would note for the record that halfway through the meeting, Mr. Myers joined us, and Mr. Vaughn is also here now towards the end. Ms. Brawley.
And I appreciate the comments on hydro. I'll just briefly mention, I remember flipping through during one of our prior meetings, the Department of Energy kind of looking at hydro overall. And what I took away from that was really pulling back from building big new facilities. And again, this is looking nationwide, really looking to augment what's already there. And again, also using new technologies. So I wonder, knowing that you're just getting into it now, but kind of how do you see that approach of balancing, not replicating the impacts that we've already seen from hydro and other places with the reality that it is there right now, of course, and that there is also renewable opportunities?
I think there's a heightened awareness on the impacts of dams on the ecological systems, and recognizing there's got to be equal consideration or high consideration given towards those consequences. So quite frankly, I don't know which report from DOE you're referring to, but I can tell you in July of 2023, DOE finished their prospects for pumped hydro storage in Alaska. And there are some concepts there that make a whole lot of sense that can be utilized in places, including potentially even at Eklutna, as long as you're considering the restoration of the river and species of salmons that people are talking about. I think there's some novel concepts and approaches that have to be thought out. The challenge would be, honestly, and the biggest challenge is going to be, this is threading a needle, is that, you've got a submission to the governor already. I think Anchorage is trying to get its vote and its voice heard will be important, but you have to also be cognizant of the consequences of any actions. We'll have to have those conversations moving forward.
I'll just briefly add, Chris and I had a chance to talk with folks from Department of Energy when we were in DC in March, not on this topic, but they were very interested in Alaska, and I am very happy to connect you guys so that you can talk energy with them. So thank you.
Oh, and I would add there's a $300,000 or $400,000 technical assistance grant that we were just qualified for. We just have to make the application, and they postponed the deadline of it, so it's still out there. And it's just funding that's ours by formula if we apply. And we almost missed the application. Thankfully, we didn't. And then they extended the deadline. So, and it's U.S. Department of Energy technical assistance. It could be very helpful in some of these conversations. So it would be helpful if you share that. With that, the question will soon be before us, confirmation of Mark Corsentino to the Director of the Anchorage Hydropower Utility. And with that, we are adjourned, and we will immediately pivot to a special assembly meeting. Madam Clerk.